We're back with the Tech Policy Grind. I'm Rima Musa, and I'm a fellow with the Internet Law and Policy Foundry, the organization where the next generation of tech law and policy professionals convene to write, think, and talk about the web, technology, and disruptive innovation. This is the Tech Policy Grind, the Foundry's podcast where we chat about what's going on in the world of tech policy. Welcome back to the Tech Policy Grind. This week's episode is another edition of our Hackathon webinar series, condensed and packaged into podcast form for TPGers as per usual. If you're new to the show or just now following the Foundry, the theme for this year's annual Policy Hackathon is artificial intelligence. And our bi-weekly webinars are diving into all the nuances of law and policy topics intersecting with unique issues that AI brings up. Today's episode features a conversation led by Foundry Fellow Alvaro Marañon on the subject of AI use cases and innovations. Alvaro chatted with Hodan Omaar, Senior Policy Analyst at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, or ITIF, Charley Snyder, Head of Security Policy at Google, and Gillian Diebold, a policy analyst also of ITIF. They discussed how artificial intelligence is being developed and applied across different industries, including cybersecurity, education, and more. Enjoy the episode.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alvaro Marañon. Please welcome our panelists. First, we have Hodan Omaar.
Hi. Thanks for having me, Alvaro.
We also have Charley Snyder.
Hi there. Great to be here with you.
And we have Gillian Diebold.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, Alvaro.
So to begin, I feel like it's important to kind of set the stage. What is artificial intelligence? And is it a tool, the latest technological development, or something entirely different?
I think there's the kind of formal definition of what AI is. It's a branch of computer science that studies, computer systems that perform operations and tasks that previously required human intelligence. But I think there's also the kind of easier way, or a seemingly easier way to understand it that is popular right now, which is through analogies. And there are lots of analogies out there right now from, AI is like commercial aviation. Each country has its own developments going on, but these things work across borders. AI is like nuclear weapons. It's a very dangerous tool that should be tightly controlled. Some people say that AI is like, other general technologies of the past, things like electricity or the steam engine. In reality, AI is not exactly like any of those things.
It would also be helpful to kind of discuss what is not AI. I know it's used as anything. Charley, you may be able to speak upon this, but in the past, we've seen everything become cyber, or everything become the next, hit term or the next popular term. In your expertise and your position at Google, you've been using advanced technologies to enhance cybersecurity and preserve the privacy of its users. Can you speak around the path you guys took around AI and when it began?
AI, to an extent, is in the eye of the beholder, or perhaps sometimes the marketer, in that it can mean many things to many different people. A loose rule of thumb is just advanced techniques to use computers to mimic human capabilities, and that has been a huge focus at Google over the years. I think we first implemented machine learning techniques to detect whether an email was kind of spam or not back in 2011. And we've built machine learning techniques into most, if not all, of our both products and internal processes over the years. What's new now is the rise of kind of large language models and the size of them and the capabilities of them. And in terms of products, generative AI and products have obviously been driving a lot of the headlines now. But the underlying, things at play, like using machines to perform, human-like tasks, goes back quite a long way.
Thank you for that, Charley. And Gillian, if you could speak about, just to give your encounters and your observations of how AI has been used in education, a field that most people haven't been really focusing in. you often focus on generative AI in current headlines?
From a lot of educational stakeholders, we see kind of this both overhype or, over caution, and then kind of also underestimating it. And I think it's something to really caution against. Students are really fast on the uptake. When ChatGPT was released in November, immediately we saw students using it and trying to figure out how to cheat and all that kind of things. And, teachers and administrators were much more hesitant and kind of had this reactionary look at it. So, what we're seeing is sort of this divergence between, the older generation that are the educators themselves and the families and administrators kind of not understanding, and then students being really, really keen on using this. There's a lot of really interesting applications going on, but I think there's just a lot of misconceptions too.
Could you each speak a bit about what is your first encounter like with working in this field? Were you optimistic, curious, or simply not impressed? I know we often get different views around this, and it'd be nice to see from your perspectives as people working.
Thinking about my first encounter with AI, I vividly remember, having worked in the AI policy space, I vividly remember my first time using, DALL-E and, using ChatGPT. And so I have very clear kind of thoughts about when I first started using those and how impressive I found them. But I think what's interesting is to think about, really the first time AI would have touched my life, and I think a lot of people's lives, is not in ways that we were cognizant of. So, I have a British passport. When it was stronger and I was able to run around the EU, I was using, facial recognition technology to get in and out of those borders very quickly. When I was, being recommended things on Google, when I was being, using it for Instagram and having certain things pushed to me. I mean, all of those experiences had AI enabled, were AI enabled, and I wasn't cognizant of them. And so my reactions to those things and being able to reflect on them in the past, I actually think I was quite curious. And I think that actually my experience of AI in the way that I didn't know beforehand should also be kind of incorporated to these very kind of, now you're using ChatGPT. What do you think about it? I think it's important to kind of reflect on the fact that AI touches our lives in many ways that we are beneficial to us that we don't know.
I think you're spot on. And, I think one way to help think about why now are we talking about AI so much versus, you're exactly right. I mean, these things have been running in the background for years, is how close the AI now is to the user experience. So consumers anywhere all over the world now can more or less, conversate with a large language model now. Whereas in the past, for the most part, these systems were behind kind of like enterprise corporate environments that, there may be a language model running or some other ML system running in the background that is yielding in a result that will eventually, be served to a user in some way. And so that's what's really quite striking about the current moment. But to the point of, these being around for a while, I think the number one, and again, my field is security. The first major time that I was really, involved or exposed to this concept was actually kind of an earlier era in the field, prior to the rise of large language models, where a part of the U.S. government called the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency sponsored this Cyber Grand Challenge that was essentially a hacking competition where different machines would hack each other and then also develop mitigations or patches for those hacks in real time. And kind of the culmination of that took place at a conference in Las Vegas called DEF CON. And, some folks may be familiar, there's going to be another DEF CON kind of AI hacking competition coming up this summer. That earlier generation, which was in, I think, like the 2015, 2016 timeframe, used kind of different technologies, more kind of like brute force fuzzing technologies that a machine would kind of iterate through to find flaws. Whereas now we're talking about obviously large language models that are kind of learning from, wide, corpus of information. So different technologies, but still to the point of, these, the attempts to make machines operate and perform human-like tasks has been going on well prior to the kind of current moment that we're in.
Yeah, and I mean, I just want to echo of that I wasn't necessarily cognizant of it, but I am of the generation that's millennial between Gen Z and millennials of, I am kind of a digital native. And so I'm thinking back onto, in high school when I would have used ed tech and, there definitely was machine learning applications going on kind of in the background. And I just didn't have that same, like you said, user facing experience. But, I mean, we were using things like Wolfram Alpha, which was just doing very basic machine learning things to kind of like help us solve math problems or walk you through something like that. And so now, I mean, of first impressions. So when I was using ChatGPT for the first time in the winter, or, any of these other applications that have come out since, in some ways I was impressed because I had never really considered it in terms of, the language capabilities, but at the same time, it felt very natural to me. I wasn't like shocked or anything in that way. And, I think a lot of the media was so blown away by it, but I think for a lot of people my age, it was sort of just a natural evolution of tools we kind of had already been using.
Could you each speak about some, developments and use cases in particular, how you've seen it benefit people in both short-term and long-term, or the promise of doing so?
Similar to what Gillian said, there's all of these kind of like sexier use cases in my field, like can an AI system develop, find vulnerabilities in other systems and develop kind of automated exploitation, things like that. But the reality is that these capabilities are applicable across a range of different practices, both in my field and others. And the real value can often be found kind of ironing out kind of some of the more kind of boring and nitty-gritty tasks in any field. So just an example that's probably boring to laypersons is if you're a new employee that starts in an organization, machine learning and AI systems, by studying all of the employees in that organization, can kind of recommend which permissions that employee needs, which systems they need access, which tools they need access to, and kind of automatically provision that so the employee doesn't have to go through the boring tasks of I need access to this system and this system and this system. There's thousands of kind of mundane tasks that can help us save that. AI systems can help us save time with. And at Google, we're pretty focused on finding what all of those kind of smaller use cases are. And I'll just name two in particular that I'm kind of excited about. First is addressing kind of the skills shortage that we have worldwide for cybersecurity, where I think just in the US alone, I think there's 700,000 unfilled cybersecurity jobs. These systems can really play a huge role, we think, in helping train people and how to be better cyber professionals, or train them and give them the skills they need to enter the workforce by having kind of these conversational models that can be very accessible to people who have no experience in the field, learn these kind of baseline concepts. Another area that we're really excited about is just the ability to learn from, the vast array of existing knowledge about threats and vulnerabilities in our field. At Google, we have a product called VirusTotal that just released a new really cool application of an LLM, where it learns from all of the malicious files that we're aware of, and VirusTotal kind of hosts the largest repository of malware or malicious files on the internet. It learns from all of them and can quickly summarize for new malicious files what that file does, can quickly tell you, is this file probably malicious or probably not malicious? And so just kind of greatly aids the task of cyber defenders in ways both kind of mundane and also very exciting.
One of the big benefits of AI, especially to teachers and administrators, is kind of automating those mundane tasks. We know that teachers spend so much time outside of the classroom on those administrative things, whether it be, grading tests or, interacting with parents and kind of just reiterating the same information they told students. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to kind of save teachers time outside of the classroom so they can really focus on in-classroom engagement. And then obviously for students, the main kind of benefit here would be the opening up the door of personalized learning. It's kind of aiming to solve the problem that a lot of classrooms in the US have of, one teacher and 25 students, and they kind of have to teach to the middle. kind of base lessons around the average student in that class. And while that obviously would work in some instances, when students are struggling with a specific skill, but the teacher has to continue forward on the lesson, that can cause some people to fall behind. And then, ultimately it creates this slope where, we see test scores decline in some areas and things like that. So I, think that AI enabled ed tech tools can, really help kind of close some of those gaps. I think one example that I'm pretty excited about and is still just in the pilot phase would be the Khan Academy Khanmigo feature. It's a AI enabled tutoring program using GPT-4, and it just has a really impressive kind of demos to it, in terms of the way it really interacts with you and really builds, and it'll kind of drill not only kind of the places you have deficits, which is sort of a traditional model of personalized learning, but also where you have strengths, and kind of will offer what you're good at in ways where you in a modality where you might not be so good at it and things like that. And, the results have already been pretty promising of, they've tested it, I think, on maybe one certain grade level of math, like algebra 1 or something like that. And, overall, like the results are great in terms of, student engagement. You can kind of monitor through those programs of, how focused are students on this, plus are they actually getting better? It's obviously something measurable with math versus, a humanities subject, but I think it's a really interesting application.
I would just quickly add on the benefits, I think, to many of our jobs, right? Like not only those of us who are policy analysts, but I think a lot of the audience, audience of ILFP, which is that, a lot of our jobs are writing and summarizing. ChatGPT can be very good at that. That doesn't mean that it's over for us, but it's about how do you integrate this into your work. And I think actually something that our organization has done is kind of take this company-wide briefing of, you're going to use ChatGPT, but how can they ensure that we are using it in the right ways, right? So there's this example of, I was writing some paper and I needed to know, I needed a link for, labor impacts on AI. And I asked ChatGPT, who's written on this? And I don't know, I hadn't asked any questions for ITIF, and they said, ITIF has written a paper on that. And I said, okay, send me the name. And it sends me the name, and I said, who wrote it? And it gave the name of the president of the organization. A completely fictitious paper. But had I not kind of done this work I searched our website. I actually went up to his office and asked him if he'd written this paper. He said no. But there was a world in which I hadn't done that, published it and sent it off to him. And he's thinking, what kind of policy analyst is this? She's saying I wrote fictitious things. But it can be very helpful, right? ChatGPT is only going to get better. Future models are only going to improve. But I think the onus is on organizations to ensure that, people, especially people in our roles, are, incorporating this in the right way. And so I think, benefits exist for people, I think, in our audience, but really thinking about, what are the steps that we need to ensure that is done in the kind of most beneficial way, right?
Yeah, and I would just add that, like, with the education case, it's not just the benefits, it's about, engaging teachers and administrators in the process and kind of helping them, giving them the professional development needed to actually be able to incorporate this kind of thing. Kind of what Hodan was saying about our organization has kind of offered these different seminars on how to actually use it for research or for, enhancing your writing. The same kind of thing has to apply to pretty much all sectors and kind of help people understand exactly how they can be using it in their jobs.
What are some thoughts about implementing new innovation? Should you always be like, oh, it's a new trendy term, or should you be more thoughtful, or what are some considerations you approach? Charley, you can begin from the cybersecurity perspective.
It depends on what perspective, who would be answering this question. If it's a organization seeking to adopt the technology, or are we, speaking from the standpoint of maybe a policymaker? I think just starting on the latter, I think we're engaging with a lot of policymakers around the world on this topic. And I think in large part, I think a lot of the reaction we've seen from, the United States, I think it's kind of the balance right where, we need to be responsible, but we also need to ground kind of what we're doing in understanding that we need to preserve this kind of spirit of innovation and opportunity that can unlock a lot of benefit to society. And so any approach, I think, needs to, be mindful of both sides there. And on the kind of responsible AI piece, I think there's no silver bullet. I think it's kind of a multi-layered approach is needed where, for certain use cases or problem sets, we need to come together to focus on new standards, new best practices, things like that. On another level, for other challenges, regulation may be needed. In particular, I think for areas like high-risk applications of artificial intelligence, and you can think of like critical sectors and things like that. And then for still other problems, I think more fundamental research is needed to kind of build entirely new approaches that we can't even really think of right now. So I think there's no specific silver bullet here, as I mentioned, but from a policymaker point of view, I think there's a lot of interesting conversations going on right now, clearly. And I think you need to look at the specific use case to determine kind of the specific solution that's needed.
To add on to that, I think when it comes to implementation and challenges around implementation, oftentimes I think there's a focus on talent and knowledge. Like, does this organization, or if the government is adopting AI, do they have the talent for it, and do they have the knowledge of it? And really focusing on those things, which I think are very important, right? But they are things that policymakers think about. But there are all these other really important things to think about, these kind of structural barriers. Even if an organization knows that AI would be useful for it, even if they know that they could, get some money and get the talent, there might not be a culture of change, right? Especially in government, especially certain government agencies, there might not be a culture of adapting well to change. There might not be financing for it. There might not be incentives or, the right metrics to ensure that it's adopted in the right way. There might not be, good procurement rules or even guidance about where to procure some of these systems from. And, as Charley touched on, there might not be the right kind of mechanisms for oversight and review. And so it's not just about making sure that people know AI is helpful to them or that they have like the people to do it. It's really about thinking comprehensively about the structural challenges they face. And I think, you and I, Alvaro, were just in a meeting earlier today talking about, the challenges with being able to adopt, or organizations being able to adopt risk management frameworks. It's a very complex thing, and so how do we make sure that there is not only that guidance exists, but really constantly thinking about the barriers to adoption in that way.
Just really quick, I like the way you broke that down, and one other thing I would add that may be missing for some enterprises or sectors is data itself. Some sectors have invested the last decade putting their data in a cloud or somewhere where they can make use of it. Other sectors are not categorizing, collecting, categorizing, and making use of the data. And if you don't have that as a precursor, where there's nothing to even train these large language models on, you're not going to be able to make use of this technology.
I'd also just add from, thinking about implementation from just like a very wide, high-level social standpoint, something Hodan and I have thought a lot about is AI literacy and just kind of how we build in the general AI literacy in the general public. And what I would mean by that would just be kind of at a high level, having everyone in the US sort of understand how these technologies like machine learning work and how they could be used for problem solving and kind of the consequences of it. And I don't necessarily mean a technical understanding, but, we've sort of spoke about how maybe in the past we weren't all cognizant of when AI was being used. But I think as it becomes more and more mainstream to be thinking about that, AI literacy and kind of helping all sorts of people in the US understand when it's being used and what's an appropriate use case and what's not would be very useful to implementation.
Charley, you spoke a little bit about the positive use cases around here, but could you each speak about some exciting use that you've seen or excited about looking forward down the road, or some problems?
Two things that came to mind. One was one of the things that we do each week is we do these they're called 5Qs, and it's 5 questions for data innovators. And recently I did one with this British AI company called Carbon Re, and they use AI to decarbonize the cement process. I didn't realize that the cement process was actually extremely, well, I knew it was carbon intensive, but I didn't realize it, like cement accounts for something like 8% of CO2 emissions globally. And you often hear about, AI for climate, but, typically they aren't as complex. Like this was they are using extremely complex models to decarbonize. I'm not going to do it justice, so you'll have to find the interview. But I thought it was really, really interesting. And when I asked if this is, it had twofold benefits. One was that it was reducing the carbon emissions, but it was also saving plants tons of money. And so I was like, well, why isn't everybody doing this? Why isn't everyone developing such solutions to decarbonize steel, all these other things? And the CEO of this company said, well, it's because it's incredibly complex problem to solve, and they are actually spun out of an academic institution. I think that they started off at Oxford and then kind of spun out. And so I think one of the questions I have is, how do we ensure that when you have a really complex public sector problem, right, something like AI for decarbonization, or in some instances AI for healthcare, or as you mentioned, like AI for humanitarian problems, that's not something that necessarily the market is going to sufficiently solve by itself. There really has to be a role for government to support innovation in this space, because it's innovation, right? It's not competitiveness. And so, what is the role for government there? And especially if the problems are so complex that the barrier to do it is so high, what is the role for encouraging academia to do some of these problems and spin out those things that could be most beneficial? I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to think about. And then the other thing that it made me think of, which isn't necessarily AI specific, is this report I wrote a couple of years ago called something about mobility data. Essentially, it was the ways in which you can use mobility data, which is data about how people move around, right? So if you're trying to solve certain humanitarian crises, you need to know how people are moving. Or if you want to solve, I don't know, or not solve, but kind of help address problems related to, people being displaced or that sort of thing. And knowing, I don't know, there's been a tornado and people are moving here. Having granular data about where people move, that data actually sits in the private sector. Uber, Facebook, they know on a granular level where I'm at, where I was a second ago, and how I'm moving, right? In a way that the census that's collected every 10 years does not know. But the private sector is not incentivized or supported to share that data, right? Why would they? All the privacy risks that are associated with sharing mobility data, the costs to them to de-anonymize and aggregate that data to make it sufficiently available. Who should they be sharing with, right? Which researchers should and shouldn't they do this with? There are all these challenges which I touch on in the report. And so even if we wanted to use AI for mobility, I don't know, to solve certain humanitarian crises, you really need to have policies that support the access to private sector mobility data. And so that was something else I thought of. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Building off what Hodan was saying is that, we do need to create an environment that kind of incentivizes these humanitarian applications. And right now we really don't have that, even at the fundamental level. Something she wrote about in her report was the European Union's idea of data altruism, meaning, certain organizations can kind of register as a data altruism organization and kind of donate their data for the public good in that way. But importantly, as it stands, Hodan can correct me if I'm wrong, but that doesn't include private sectors. Private sector organizations can't register as a data altruism organization. So we need to think about when we're creating sort of legislation that we're actually enabling these social good applications and not just automatically limiting them on the basis of its public sector or private sector, things like that.
I guess to close off the panel, if you each could just give some closing thoughts about, I know it's the worst thing to ask, but predictions, you can, whether it be the next year or 2 years or things you're looking out for. Thank you.
Okay. I think what I'm looking out for in the next 2 years is to see Well, one, if we get any sort of national privacy legislation, because that's really important to, fingers crossed, to the development of AI in the education sector as a whole. Schools are really resistant to sort of use it because they're really worried about, and districts are worried because they're worried about staying in compliance, obviously, with current privacy laws. And, when we're going into states at things, then the ed tech companies are worried about, how will we port our data across state borders if one state has this law, one state has that. So something I'm looking at. Definitely privacy legislation. Also kind of looking to see, now we've had almost a full school year with ChatGPT, but, kind of a mix on where we are with the bans versus, allowing the tool to be used in the classroom. So interested in kind of seeing how that develops and, whether schools and districts take more firm stances and whether that comes at the district or the state level, things like that.
I guess an easy prediction to make is that these models will get better, right? The types of models and also the companies developing them, I think it's going to, become even better. I think one of the areas, there are many, but one of the areas that I'm interested in keeping an eye on is, given the upcoming election cycle, I think, AI and mis and disinformation is one that I hope to keep my finger on. And really, I won't make any predictions, but I think that it's one that policy will be more interested in, given the election cycle.
Those are all good ones. I'm interested to see, I think from basically the beginning of this year, even December, there's been a huge, hype cycle created, if you will. I'm interested to see how the conversation evolved as perhaps that kind of cycle cools off, and certain risks that were much theorized don't come to pass, or maybe vice versa, new things we hadn't considered become more pressing. And so I'm interested to see how the conversation evolves there.
That's a great way to end it. Thank you all. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Tech Policy Grind. If you enjoyed the show, get in touch with us at Foundry Podcasts with an S at ilpfoundry.us, or leave us a review wherever you're tuning in. I'm Rima Musa, the host of the show, and this podcast wouldn't be possible without the help of our team at the Internet Law and Policy Foundry. Thank you to Evan Enzer for editing this episode, Lama Mohammed, our social coordinator, Allison McReynolds, our accessibility coordinator, and Tim Lorden at the Internet Education Foundation. See you next time.